Hello everyone, this is Fanindra from Sri Chaitanya Education Institutions. I am the zoology faculty here. Now, in today's topic, we are discussing about the ecosystem, the chapter number 14, ecosystem. So, what is meant by an ecosystem? Ecosystem is the functional unit of nature where the organisms interact with their biotic and abiotic factors. So, how do these organisms interact with all the biotic factors and abiotic factors? Where do these interact? All these things we are going to discuss in this particular chapter, which is called as ecosystem. So, this is a very important statement where living organisms interact among themselves and also with the surroundings, physical environment, that is nothing but the biotic and abiotic factors which are present in that particular ecosystem. So, ecosystem can be a small region or it's a very vast region like a forest or a sea, or it can also be a very small region like a small pond. Okay. So, many ecologists suggest that our Earth is like entire biosphere is as a global ecosystem. Earth is nothing but a biosphere and it's a global ecosystem. Now, as this ecosystems, since this system is too much big and complex to be studied at one time, it is convenient to divide into two basic categories, namely terrestrial and aquatic. So, these ecosystems like the Earth, we cannot study about the total components present inside the Earth. So, we are basically dividing these ecosystems into the terrestrial ecosystems and the aquatic ecosystems. Terrestrial ecosystems, you well know about that, this is on the land, and aquatic ecosystems are related to the water. Now, when it comes to the terrestrial ecosystems, forest, grassland and deserts are some examples of the terrestrial ecosystem. So, many different types of forest, tropical forest, temperate forest, deciduous forest, coniferous forest, different types of forests. Then similarly, the grasslands and deserts, all these comes under the terrestrial ecosystems. Pond, lake and wetland, river and estuary are some of the examples of aquatic ecosystems. So, in the aquatic ecosystems, we just classify these aquatic ecosystems into lentic and lotic habitats. Lentic and lotic ecosystems. So, what are lentic and lotic ecosystems? Lotic ecosystems are flowing ecosystems. Flowing ecosystems. Lentic ecosystems are stagnant ecosystems. Lentic ecosystems are stagnant ecosystems, lotic ecosystems are flowing ecosystems. Stagnant ecosystems, you can take it as pond and lakes, whereas flowing ecosystems, you can take it as rivers. So, here all these are ponds, lakes and rivers, all these are coming under freshwater ecosystems. Freshwater ecosystems, and study of freshwater ecosystems is also called as limnology. Study of freshwater ecosystems is called limnology. So, these are all the freshwater ecosystems which we are going to discuss: lentic, lotic, then the stagnant ecosystems and the flowing ecosystems, ponds, lakes and rivers. Now, when it comes to marine water ecosystems, so what are marine water ecosystems? Salt water ecosystems, and the marine water ecosystems, you can just classify them into seas and oceans. So, all these comes under marine water ecosystems. Now, the final is estuary. Estuary is a place where the river joins the sea, which is also called mouth of the river. Estuary is also called as mouth of the river. This is the place where the river joins the sea. So, all these comes under the different types of aquatic ecosystems. Now, other than these, we have crop fields and aquariums, which are called as man-made ecosystems or anthropogenic ecosystems, which are man-made, because crop field is a man-made ecosystem and aquarium is also a man-made ecosystem. Now, in this particular chapter, we are going to discuss about all the basic components which are present inside the ecosystem. Let us see in the next page what we are going to discuss right now. Now, in ecosystem, so mainly as we have discussed about the biotic and abiotic factors, what are the different types of biotic and abiotic factors which are going to affect our survival. Then, now these biotic and abiotic factors all these are in an integrated manner where the ecosystem will be functioning. So, mainly interaction of biotic and abiotic components results in physical structure that is characteristic for each type of ecosystem. Interaction of biotic and abiotic factors results in a physical structure. Okay, this is very important. Identification and enumeration. What is meant by enumeration? Enumeration is nothing but the counting of the total number of species of plant and animal species of an ecosystem gives species composition, very important. So, counting and identification of all these organisms, identification and counting of these organisms tells us about the species composition of the particular ecosystem. Then, this is very important. Vertical distribution of different species occupying different levels is called as stratification. Stratification is a vertical distribution of different species occupying different levels. Here, for example, trees occupy top vertical strata and or the top vertical strata or layer of the forest. Shrubs the second, and herbs and grasses occupy the bottom layer. See, for example, if I draw a tree like this, the trees occupies the top vertical strata because the trees are occupying the larger ones. Next to trees, you can just take the herbs and shrubs, like where they will be occupying the next vertical strata. Now, next comes to shrubs, the smaller plants, and next comes to the grasslands, like this. So, trees, then next comes to shrubs and herbs as well as grasslands. Herbs as well as grasslands, all these will be occupying the vertical strata. So, this is how you can just calculate the vertical strata of the different types of organisms present in an ecosystem, and this is called as a stratification. Vertical distribution of the organisms present in an ecosystem is called as stratification. Now, what are the four basic components of an ecosystem? Like productivity is a basic component of an ecosystem, decomposition and energy flow, the flow of energy, as well as nutrient cycling. These are the four basic components, and every ecosystem will have these all four basic components. Even if it is a small pond ecosystem, or it may be a large ecosystem like the terrestrial ecosystems, forest, or it may be sea or ocean. In all the ecosystems, all these four basic components definitely will be operating. What are the four basic components? Productivity, decomposition, energy flow, and the nutrient cycling. Now, let us take a pond as a basic example here. So, this paragraph tells us about the pond ecosystem. Now, let us take a pond ecosystem. This is a pond ecosystem. Now, this pond ecosystem is filled with water. Let us take, this is a shallow water body. So, to understand the ethos of ecosystem, ethos are nothing but the characteristics of an ecosystem. Here taking pond as an example. Now, pond is a shallow water body. It's not too deep. So that's why it is called as shallow water body. Now, this pond, in the pond, what are the abiotic components of the pond? So, generally the water with all the dissolved inorganic and organic substances, and rich soil deposit at the bottom of the pond. Soil deposit at the bottom of the pond. This is soil deposit, and the water which is present here, all this water will form the abiotic components of the pond ecosystem, the water which is present here. Now, the solar input, because the sunlight, solar input, so the pond receives the sunlight, the solar input, and cycle of temperature, because cycle of temperature again depends upon the solar input here, the sunlight. Day length, this also depends upon the sunlight, as well as other climatic conditions regulate the rate of function of the entire pond. So, these are all the different factors, abiotic factors, which are responsible for the different types of functions occurring inside the pond. Now, let us take the autotrophs which are present in the pond. Let us take some phytoplanktons or algae which are floating on the surface of the pond. Phytoplanktons or algae which are floating on the surface of the pond. Now, what does this phytoplanktons or algae do? The phytoplanktons or algae will receive the sunlight, and by utilizing the sunlight, these phytoplanktons or algae will perform photosynthesis and produce their own food material. Okay. So, this is how you can see the phytoplanktons, algae, or you can also see some floating plants, right, and you can also see some submerged plants like hydrilla, submerged plants, floating plants and submerged plants. Like this, we have so many different types of autotrophic organisms which are present inside the pond, which help in performing photosynthesis, and you can also see some marginal plants which are found at the edges, marginal plants. Okay. So these are all the different types of autotrophic organisms which are present here, and all these autotrophic organisms will help in performing photosynthesis. Now this comes under productivity. So these plants, if they perform photosynthesis, what do you call it? This is called as productivity. Producing the food material or the production of biomass or the living matter with the help of the solar energy or the radiant energy that is present inside the sunlight is called as a productivity. So can you find the first basic component of ecosystem in the pond ecosystem? Yes, definitely. That is nothing but productivity, which is converting the solar energy or the radiant energy into the chemical energy. Right. Now let us take the next one, the consumers. So what are meant by consumers? So here these phytoplanktons are fed by the zooplanktons which are present here. The zooplanktons are the small insects which are present here. These zooplanktons will be feeding this phytoplanktons. The zooplanktons will feed on the phytoplanktons, right? So zooplanktons. So these phytoplanktons are eaten away by these zooplanktons. Now these zooplanktons come under the primary consumers of that particular area. So the zooplanktons are the primary consumers. As well as these zooplanktons are fed by, the large fishes. For example, small fishes. So this is a small fish. This is a small fish which is eating this zooplankton. Now the small fish is fed by the large fish, the large fishes which are present inside this pond, the large fishes which are present here. Now these large fishes finally, so the free swimming and bottom dwelling forms are responsible for eating this consumers, the producers and the consumers. So producers are fed by zooplankton, zooplanktons are fed by small fishes are fed by large fishes. So here the energy present in the phytoplanktons is entering into consumers. This is T1 level, this is T2 level, and this is T3 level, and this is T4 level, trophic levels, where the energy is moving from one organism to the other organism, which is called as a food chain. So energy is being transferred from one level to other level. So this is also one of the basic components which are occurring inside the pond ecosystem. Now this finally the fish which is present here, if the fish dies, now once the fish dies, the fish is deposited at the bottom of the pond. Now in the bottom of the pond we have fungi, bacteria and flagellates especially abundant in the bottom of the pond. Now what does this fungi, bacteria and flagellates do? These fungi, bacteria and flagellates, they are decomposers which will decompose the dead organisms which are present here and release the nutrients again back into the water. The nutrients are added back to the water. So this is called as decomposition. So this is again one of the basic component as the nutrients are added back to the water. Now because of the stratification occurring inside the lakes during the summer season and in the winter season, the stratification occurs. So what is meant by stratification? The topmost layers of the lakes will come to the bottom layers and the bottom layers will be returned back to the top layers. This is called as a stratification. In a year, in every pond or lake, 2 times the stratification takes place. So they are called dimictic lakes in summer season and as well as winter season. Now because of the stratification, the topmost layers are brought to the bottom and the bottom layers are brought to the top layer. Now in this way, when the topmost layers are coming to the bottom and the bottom layers are coming to the top, there is a cycling of nutrients. The nutrients from the bottom layers will be entering into the topmost layer, and oxygen which is present in the top layer will be entering into the bottom layer. So this is how the cycling of nutrients takes place. So did we see productivity here? Yes, obviously the plants are producing food material which is called productivity. Did we see energy flow here? Yes, obviously, because from phytoplanktons to zooplanktons to bottom dwelling forms, the energy is being transferred. Did we see the decomposition here? Yes, definitely, because the dead organisms are being decomposed by the bacteria or the flagellates which are present at the bottom of the pond, the fungi, as well as the nutrient cycling occurs continuously because the nutrients are exchanged in the pond with the help of stratification. So all four basic components called productivity, energy flow, decomposition and nutrient cycling, they are operating even in a small ecosystem which is called as a pond ecosystem. So will you accept that all these four basic components are occurring in the pond ecosystem? Yes, definitely. So this is a very important paragraph which tells us about the functions of all the ecosystems by a single pond. So the system performs all the functions of an ecosystem and of the biosphere as a whole. So if you see here, conversion of inorganic to organic material with the help of radiant energy, that is photosynthesis with the help of solar energy. Consumption of the autotrophs by heterotrophs, that is nothing but the energy flow. Decomposition and mineralization of dead organisms, this is nothing but the decomposition. And reuse by the autotrophs, these are repeated over and over again. So nutrient cycling continuously takes place. All the four basic components we have seen. Now there is a unidirectional movement of energy. The energy flows only in one particular direction. The energy cannot flow in the bidirectional direction. So the unidirectional flow of energy towards the higher trophic levels. Higher trophic levels, if phytoplankton is a basic level, then zooplankton is higher, small fishes, large fishes are the higher trophic levels. In the higher trophic levels, and some amount of energy is lost, some amount of energy is wasted and it is lost into the atmosphere in the form of heat. That is the reason our atmospheric conditions, the climatic conditions are warm in nature. So this is how always some amount of energy is being wasted. So by taking pond as a small example, this is a pond ecosystem. By taking pond as a small ecosystem, here we can explain all the basic components which are occurring in every ecosystem. We can also explain with the help of a pond ecosystem. Is that clear, everyone? Okay. Now let us see the first component of the ecosystem, which is nothing but the productivity. The first component of the ecosystem, which is called productivity. Now for the productivity, what is the main source of energy? The basic source of energy is solar energy. So constant input of solar energy is needed for every ecosystem to function and as well as sustain, to survive. Okay. Now let us see the definition. Primary production is very, very important. Primary production, what is meant by primary production? Amount of biomass or organic matter produced per unit area over a time period by plants during photosynthesis. Very, very important definition. Amount of organic matter or biomass produced per unit area per unit time by the plants during photosynthesis is called as the primary production. And this primary production is expressed in terms of gram meter square inverse or kilocalories meter square inverse. Okay. The rate of biomass production is called as a productivity. The rate of biomass production, this is the next definition. Rate of biomass production is called as productivity. Rate, right? So this can be taken as gram meter square inverse year inverse or kilocalorie per meter square inverse year inverse, to compare the productivity of different ecosystems. Now this productivity can be divided into gross primary productivity and net primary productivity. Two parts. Gross primary productivity. What is meant by gross primary productivity? Gross primary productivity is the rate of production of organic matter during photosynthesis. Once again, gross primary productivity is the rate of production of organic matter during photosynthesis. So in this GPP, some amount of GPP is always used by the plants for their respiration, because not only plants, every organism will use some amount of energy for their respiration. Now that amount of energy is called as respiratory loss. This is called respiratory loss. Now these respiratory losses, when you take GPP, the gross primary productivity, the organisms will utilize some energy for the respiratory losses. So if you remove these respiratory losses from the GPP, you will get NPP, net primary productivity. So what is the formula for GPP? GPP is GPP minus R is equal to NPP. So what is R? R is nothing but the respiratory losses. So NPP is nothing but the amount of energy that is been removed from the gross primary productivity for their own respiration. This is called as net primary productivity. How can you define net primary productivity? Available biomass for the consumption to heterotrophs like herbivores or decomposers is called as net primary productivity. Because plants utilize some of the energy for their respiration. Now after utilizing that energy for their respiration, the energy which is left over in the plants, which is useful by the herbivores, because herbivores are the organisms which eat the plants. The energy which is left over by the plants that is used by the herbivores is called as net primary productivity. Now what the herbivores will do? Herbivores will develop some new organic matter after utilizing this. Now that is called secondary productivity. What is secondary productivity? Rate of formation of new organic matter by consumers. Rate of formation of new organic matter by consumers or the herbivores or carnivores, whatever it may be, which is called secondary productivity. Okay. Now there is some information which is given here. Primary productivity, like what factors will decide the primary productivity? Primary productivity depends on plant species which are present in that particular area. Plant species inhabiting the particular area is called as primary productivity. Now on what the primary productivity depends? Primary productivity depends on environmental factors, availability of the nutrients and photosynthetic capacity of the plants. Primary productivity depends on environmental factors, availability of nutrients and photosynthetic capacity of the plants. Very important. Very important. You have to remember all these three factors in the examination. Now, so primary productivity, because of these three factors, the primary productivity varies in different ecosystems. It's not same in all the ecosystems. It varies in different types of ecosystems depending upon the productivity in that particular ecosystem. Okay. Now, the annual net primary productivity of the entire biosphere is approximately 170 billion tons, which is always measured in terms of dry weight. 170 billion tons. It's dry weight of the organic matter. Okay, dry weight of the organic matter. Of these 170 billion tons, right, 70% of the surface, the productivity of the oceans are only 55 billion tons, because oceans occupy very high percentage of the atmosphere, the biosphere, but these oceans will occupy only 55 billion tons and the remaining 115 billion tons is occupied by the terrestrial ecosystems. Okay. Rest of course is on land. Land is nothing but terrestrial. Discuss the main reason for the low productivity of ocean, because due to the non-availability of the sunlight. So sunlight decides, sunlight is the most important factor, light is the most important factor which decides the productivity here. Okay. So that's about the different types of productivity in the first basic component of the ecosystem. The next important component is decomposition. So what is meant by decomposition? Breakdown of complex organic substances into simple inorganic substances with the help of microorganisms is called as decomposition. Complex organic substances into simple inorganic substances with the help of microbes is called as decomposition. Now in the decomposition, mainly decomposition, right, starts with the earthworm. Earthworms are called detritivores. These are also called friends of the farmers because they aerate the soil, because when they are going deep into the soil, they make pores inside the soil and with the help of which the soil will be aerated. As well as earthworms will remove worm castings. They eat the food material. They are detritivores, eat the litter or different food materials and then convert that into the worms, right, worm casting, that is vermicompost we are getting from the earthworms. So that's why earthworms are called as friends of the farmers. Now in the detritus, what is the raw material for the detritus? Raw material for the detritus is called as raw material for the decomposition is called as detritus. So what is meant by detritus? The raw material for the decomposition is called as detritus. Now this detritus, it depends, like it can be a plant matter, it can be an animal matter. So for example, it can be leaves, bark, flowers and dead remains of animals including fecal matter. Constitute the detritus. And the organisms which feed on the detritus is called as detritivores. So detritivores, the first organisms which feed on the detritus, example earthworms and some mites are called as detritivores. Now what does the detritus do? The detritus, for example, if there is a fallen leaf, the earthworm which is feeding on this fallen leaf, earthworm, the segmented worm, the earthworm feeding on the fallen leaf will break these leaves into smaller pieces, which is called as fragmentation. What is meant by fragmentation? Breaking down of detritus into smaller pieces is called as fragmentation. During fragmentation, when the earthworm is breaking this detritus into smaller pieces, there are still smaller pieces which are being formed here, minute substances which are being formed here, and these substances get dissolved in the water and they enter into deeper parts of the soil, they percolate into the soil and settle down in the soil as unavailable inorganic substances, unavailable salts, unavailable inorganic nutrients. So this process of the substances going deep into the soil after dissolving in the water, and they are unavailable inorganic salts which are nothing but, this process is called as leaching. So leaching, soluble inorganic nutrients go down into soil horizon and get precipitation as unavailable salts. This is called as leaching. Now simultaneously, when the fragmentation takes place, the bacteria which are present here and the fungi which are present here, this bacteria and fungi will release some enzymes on the smaller pieces which are being formed here, and now these smaller pieces will be broken down into simpler substances with the help of bacterial and fungal enzymes, and that process is called catabolism. So here we have seen this is called fragmentation, and this process is called as leaching, and the breakdown of the detritus or breakdown of the simple substances here which are formed from after the detritus into much more simple substances with the help of bacteria and fungi. This process is called as catabolism. So all these steps will occur simultaneously. So all the steps in decomposition operate simultaneously on the detritus. In the catabolism, now we have two more steps called humification and the mineralization. So humification and mineralization occurring during decomposition. Now what is humification? Humification leads to accumulation of a dark colored amorphous substance called humus that is highly resistant to microbial action and undergo decomposition at extremely slow rate. So this humus is an amorphous substance, powdery, which is being formed on the surface of the soil, which is very dark, and it is highly resistant to microbial action, as well as it occurs decomposition at very slow rate. Right. This humus is colloidal in nature. So as it is colloidal in nature, it is a reservoir of many nutrients, as well as it is further degraded by the microbes. It takes a lot of time to release the inorganic nutrients into the soil, and this process is called mineralization, which is the final step of the decomposition. Okay. So basically you will take decomposition into three steps: fragmentation, leaching and catabolism. And in the catabolism you see humification and the mineralization. Mineralization is the slowest step which takes place and the final step which occurs inside the decomposition. Okay. Now this decomposition, what are the factors that are affecting the decomposition? What are the factors? There are many factors which affect the decomposition. Decomposition, if you talk about, decomposition is an oxygen requiring process. So it's an oxygen requiring process. Oxygen is very much essential for the decomposition to occur. And this decomposition depends upon the chemical composition of the detritus. Chemical composition of the detritus depends on the detritus. If the detritus is rich in nitrogen and soluble sugars, if the detritus is rich in nitrogen and water soluble sugars, then the decomposition rate will be faster. If the detritus is rich in lignin and chitin, the decomposition rate will be slower. So decomposition occurs faster if the detritus is rich in nitrogen and water soluble sugars. Decomposition rate will be slower if the detritus is rich in lignin and chitin. Next, decomposition also depends on temperature and soil moisture. In high temperatures, the decompositions will be good. the warm temperatures, optimum temperatures, whereas in low temperatures the decompositions will not take place. That's the reason we keep the food in the refrigerators and the food doesn't get spoiled, because in refrigerators the temperatures are very, very low. Okay. Then moisture, soil moisture. Moisture is a very important factor for the decomposition to occur, right? If there is high moisture, more rate of decomposition, low moisture, less rate of decomposition. Then next comes a warm and moist environment favors decomposition, whereas low temperature and anaerobic gases inhibits decomposition. So because decomposition is an oxygen requiring process, in anaerobic condition, if the oxygen is not available, decomposition rate gradually decreases. So these are all the factors. So oxygen and detritus rich in nitrogen and soluble sugars, warm temperature and moisture are the favorable temperatures for decomposition. Anaerobic conditions, detritus rich in lignin and chitin, low temperature, low moisture are the unfavorable conditions for the decompositions to occur. So that's about the decomposition which takes place, and this diagram clearly tells us about the decomposition, how does it takes place. Okay. Now the next is energy flow, the next basic component of the ecosystem, which is called as energy flow. So for all the ecosystems except deep sea hydrothermal ecosystems, because deep sea hydrothermal, the vents which are present in the bottom of the sea, in those deep sea hydrothermal ecosystems, sun is not available most probably, but majority of all the ecosystems, sun is the only source of ecosystems for on the earth, source of energy for all the ecosystems on the earth. Of this, incident solar radiation, ISR, we take ISR. What is ISR? Incident solar radiation. The incident solar radiation which is falling on the earth surface, out of these incident solar radiation, less than 50% is PAR. What is meant by PAR? Photosynthetically active radiation. Photosynthetically active radiation, the radiation which is available for the photosynthesis. Out of this photosynthetically active radiation, 2 to 10% will be utilized by the plants. 2 to 10% will be utilized by the plants for their photosynthesis. So it means that from the ISR, the plants will take almost 1%. Mostly 1% of energy from the incident solar radiation is utilized by the plants. Okay. Then, so it is very important that solar energy captured by plants flows to different organisms in an ecosystem. All organisms dependent for their food on producers either directly or indirectly, because we all know that. Then, so there is a unidirectional flow of energy from producers to the consumers, and this is called as first law of thermodynamics. First law of thermodynamics, energy can neither be created nor destroyed but will be transferred from one form to other form, which is first law of thermodynamics. So all the ecosystems will follow the first law of thermodynamics. None. Further, ecosystems are not exempted, very important, not exempted from the second law of thermodynamics. Every ecosystem has to follow second law of thermodynamics, because these for energy, for the ecosystem to function, constant supply of energy is always required. Why? Because for the new molecules to be synthesized, to counteract the universal tendency towards increasing disorderliness, because as the population of the amount of organisms which are present in ecosystem gradually increases, the disorderliness also gradually increases. So to counteract the disorderliness, constant supply of energy has to be done, and this is called second law of thermodynamics. So all ecosystems has to follow both first law of thermodynamics as well as second law of thermodynamics. So ecosystems cannot be exempted from the second law and first law of thermodynamics. So this is about the energy, the first paragraph of the energy flow. Now in the energy flow, the green plants in the ecosystem, what are the green plants called? The green plants are called as producers. Now these producers in terrestrial ecosystems, what are the major producers? Herbaceous and woody plants. Whereas in aquatic ecosystems, what are the major producers? Phytoplanktons, algae and higher plants are the major producers in the aquatic ecosystem. Now when it comes to producers, the producers mainly in the food chain, the producers are fed by the consumers. Now let us take the consumers which are present here. The consumers which are present inside the food chains are the primary consumers and the secondary consumers or the tertiary consumers or the top carnivores. The first consumers which eat on the plants, nothing but the consumers are called heterotrophs, and the consumers which eat the plants are called as the primary consumers. Primary consumers. And the consumers which eat on the primary consumers are called as secondary consumers, and the consumers which eat on the secondary consumers, they are called as tertiary consumers, and the organisms which feed on the tertiary consumers, they are called as top carnivores. So, if I write like this, producers are nothing but the plants. Producers are eaten by the herbivores. Herbivores are eaten by the carnivores, and the carnivores are eaten by the top carnivores, or you can also call them as omnivores. Now the producers are nothing but the plants which produce. Herbivores are called as the primary consumers, whereas the carnivores are called as the secondary consumers, and the top carnivores are called as the tertiary consumers or top carnivores, whatever it may be. Now the carnivores are called secondary consumers. Secondary consumers, they are in turn called as the primary carnivores. Okay, whereas these are called secondary carnivores. Like this we can classify or we can divide the organisms. The producers, herbivores come in primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, top carnivores. Primary carnivores and secondary carnivores, which is given in that particular paragraph. Okay. So, grass, goat, man. Grass is a producer, goat is a primary consumer, man is a secondary consumer. Right. Now, in the food chains, we have two different types of food chains. Now, what are the food chains here? The first one is detritus food chain. What is detritus food chain? Detritus food chain, DFC, begins with dead organic matter. It begins with dead organic matter. Now, this detritus food chain is decomposed. Detritus is eaten away by the detrivores and the food chain gradually continues. Now, it is made up of decomposers which are heterotrophic organisms, mainly fungi and bacteria. Now, how does the decomposers will utilize their energy? These decomposers will release some bacteria and fungi, will release some enzymes outside and then digest the food particles outside and then intake the digested food particle into their body, which is also then this type of nutrition is also called as saprotrophic nutrition. So, saprotrophic nutrition, this is called saprotrophs. Now, as I told you, decomposers secrete digestive enzymes, break down the waste materials and subsequently all these nutrients will be absorbed by them. This is called detritus food chain. Whereas grazing food chain, like right now, just now what we have seen, nothing but the grazing food chain like produces primary consumers like a grass, grasshopper, frog, snake and a hawk, that comes under the grazing food chain. Out of these two food chains, the detritus food chain and the grazing food chain, the grazing food chain is a major conduit of energy flow for aquatic ecosystem, very important. Grazing food chain is a major conduit of energy flow for aquatic ecosystem, whereas for terrestrial ecosystem, the major conduit of energy is detritus food chain. For terrestrial ecosystem, major conduit of energy, the major flow of energy flows through detritus food chain. Whereas for aquatic ecosystem is this grazing food chain. Now, please note this point here. Detritus food chain may be connected with the grazing food chain at some levels. Some of the organisms of DSC are prey to GFC. Detritus food chain is connected to the grazing food chain at some levels. The organisms of DFC may become prey for the organisms of GFC at some levels. Very important point. These 2 points you have to remember. Right, and there are some organisms called omnivores like cockroaches and crows, which also forms the food webs. Okay, this interconnection between all the organisms is called as a food web. Many food chains will combine to form a food web. Now, in these food chains or in the food webs, the energy level at every level of food chain is called as a trophic level. Energy level is called as trophic level. Now, if you look at here, the plants occupy the first trophic level. First trophic level produces, and primary consumers will occupy the second trophic level. Secondary consumers will occupy the third trophic level. Tertiary consumers will occupy the fourth trophic level. These are called the energy present at every level of food chain is called as a trophic level. Now, gradually when we go to trophic levels of the next higher levels, the energy gradually decreases. Next is the biomass. The biomass, the living matter present at every level of food chain is called as a biomass. Biomass or living matter present at every level of food chain is called as a standing crop, and this standing crop can be measured in terms of biomass, or it can also be measured in terms of number. And it can also be measured in terms of fresh weight or dry weight. But out of this, dry weight is more accurate than the fresh weight, because fresh weight had some water, water gives a false weight. So, dry weight is the original weight or actual weight present in an organism. So, now please see this point. Organisms at each trophic level depend on those at the lower trophic level for their energy demands, because higher trophic levels will depend on the lower trophic levels. Okay. Then the number of trophic levels in a grazing food chain is restricted to 4 or 5, because there is a law called as a 10% law. Let us take the 10% law. For example, grasshopper, frog, snake, hawk. This is a basic food chain. Now, in this basic food chain, this is trophic level 1, trophic level 2, second trophic level, third trophic level, fourth trophic level, fifth trophic level. Now, if sunlight is giving some 1000 calories of energy or 10,000 calories of energy to the grass, but grass will utilize only 1% of the energy present in the sunlight. Now, the grass will be getting 100 calories of energy. Now, grass will utilize the 90% of the energy. 90% is utilized, only 10% is being transferred. So, only 10 calories of energy is transferred to the next level. Again, grasshoppers will utilize 90% of the energy, and then only 10% will be transferred to the next level. So, this is 1 calorie will be transferred to the next level. Now, again frog will utilize 90% of the energy and 10% will be transferred to the next level. 0.1 calories will be transferred to the next level to the snake, and when it comes to hawk, only 0.01 calories are transferred to the hawk. This is how at every level of food chain 90% of the energy is utilized for themselves for their respiratory losses, and only 10% of energy is transferred to the next level, and this law is called 10% law, which is given by Lindemann, and this law is also called Lindemann's law. 10% law. So, what is 10% law? Only 10% of the energy is transferred to the next trophic level, and the remaining 90% of the energy is utilized by the organisms for their own needs or for their respiratory losses. Okay, this is called 10% law or Lindemann's law. And because of the 10% law, the levels of food chain either in the grazing food chain or in the detritus food chain are restricted to only 4 or 5. Both grazing food chain as well as the detritus food chain, because it is given very clearly. Do you think there is any such limitation in the detritus food chain? Yes, obviously, in both the food chains, the energy levels or trophic levels are restricted to 4 or 5 due to the 10% law or Lindemann's law. Okay. Then ecological pyramids. Very important. Ecological pyramids were given by Elton. So, these are also called as Eltonian pyramids. This is given by Elton. So, these are also called ecological pyramids are also called as Eltonian pyramids. Now, how do you get an ecological pyramid? So, these ecological pyramids, if you place the food chains, the relationships in the food chains in an order, it forms a pyramid like structure. with a broad base and the narrow top, which is narrow apex, which is called as the pyramid. Now in these pyramids, we have different types of pyramids: pyramid of number, pyramid of biomass, and pyramid of energy. Pyramid of number, pyramid of biomass, and pyramid of energy. Now let us take, so in the pyramid of different types of pyramids, if I try to explain, pyramid of numbers. Pyramid of numbers. Pyramid of number for a terrestrial ecosystems, if you talk about terrestrial ecosystems. So in the terrestrial ecosystems, producers are very high. Producers are very high. Primary consumers are less, let us take. Then secondary consumers are also less. Tertiary consumers are less. Top carnivores are still less. So this forms an upright pyramid. What is this? Terrestrial ecosystem, number of terrestrial ecosystem, the pyramid of number forms an upright pyramid. In aquatic ecosystem also, there are huge number of phytoplanktons, then less number of zooplanktons, then less number of small fishes, less number of large fishes, and very less number of fish eating birds. Now this will form a upright pyramid even in the aquatic ecosystem. Aquatic ecosystem is also upright. Pyramid of number for aquatic ecosystem is also upright. Pyramid of number for parasitic food chain, very important. Parasitic food chain. Pyramid of number for parasitic food chain. So what is parasitic food chain? Here there is a tree. And on the tree there are the birds which are present on the tree, the small birds which are present on the tree, and these birds, the parasites which are present on these small birds. There are so many parasites which are on these birds. So this parasitic food chain gives an inverted pyramid. Pyramid of number for parasitic food chain is inverted. Pyramid of number for parasitic food chain is inverted. Similarly, pyramid of number for a tree ecosystem. In the tree ecosystem, there is one tree, and on the tree there are many insects which are present here, caterpillars or insects which are present here. This is tree, this is insects, and on the insects there are few birds which are feeding on these insects. The birds, small birds which are feeding on these insects, and on the small birds there are few large birds which are feeding on these small birds. Now if you plot a pyramid, now this forms a spindle shaped pyramid, spindle shaped or top shaped or urn shaped pyramid. So once again, pyramid of number for terrestrial ecosystem is upright, pyramid of number for aquatic ecosystem is upright, pyramid of number for parasitic food chain is inverted, pyramid of number for tree ecosystem is spindle shape. Now when you go with the pyramid of biomass, pyramid of biomass for terrestrial ecosystem, pyramid of biomass for terrestrial ecosystem is upright, whereas pyramid of biomass for aquatic ecosystem is inverted pyramid. Aquatic ecosystem, because phytoplanktons will have very less biomass, zooplanktons will have more biomass, small fishes will have more biomass than the large fishes, phytoplanktons, zooplanktons, small fishes. So pyramid of biomass for aquatic ecosystem is an inverted pyramid. This is very, very important. So pyramid of biomass for terrestrial ecosystem is upright, whereas pyramid of biomass for aquatic ecosystem is inverted. And pyramid of energy for all the ecosystems is always upright. Pyramid of energy for all the ecosystems is always upright because of 10% law. So pyramid of energy for all the ecosystems is always upright because of 10% law. So pyramid of number for terrestrial ecosystem is upright, aquatic ecosystem upright, parasitic food chain inverted, tree ecosystem spindle, pyramid of biomass for terrestrial ecosystem upright, aquatic ecosystem inverted, pyramid of energy for all the ecosystems is upright pyramid. So these these pyramids are mentioned in the pictures in your NCERT textbook, saying that, so the number, this is a number for terrestrial ecosystem, it's keep on decreasing, and this is biomass for terrestrial ecosystem, it keeps on decreasing, and this is biomass for aquatic ecosystem, it keeps on increasing, and this is pyramid of energy for terrestrial ecosystem. 1 lakh joules of energy from here to the producers, it is around 1%, very important, 1%. From here it is 10%. So only 1% of ISR is taken by the plants, and remaining 10% will be transferred to the next level. So this is what we can say, the 1% of energy is only converted to GPP and finally to NPP in the pyramid of energy. So this is about the different types of ecological pyramids. Now, so this says about the ecological pyramids. In the ecological pyramids, there is one particular conclusion which has been given here. One must remember that trophic level represents a functional level, not a species as such. It's a functional level, it's not a species level. Then, sometimes at a given species may occupy more than one trophic level in the same ecosystem at the same time. For example, a sparrow eating a grain becomes a primary consumer. A sparrow eating an insect will become a secondary consumer. So sometimes a single organism can occupy more than one trophic levels. So these are all the examples of pyramid of numbers and pyramid of biomass. Just know what we have discussed here. Then, if you go with the limitations of the ecological pyramids, in the limitations of the ecological pyramids, what are the limitations of ecological pyramids? Ecological pyramids does not take into account of the species belonging to 2 or more trophic levels. Very important. It assumes a simple food chain that almost never exists in the nature. It does not accommodate a food web. Food webs are not accommodated in the ecological pyramids, and saprophytes are not placed inside the ecological pyramids. So saprophytes are not placed, food webs are not accommodated, and a simple food chain will never exist in the nature, as well as if organism occupies 2 or more trophic levels and that is not placed inside the food ecological pyramids. So these are the limitations of ecological pyramids. So this is about the ecosystem chapter. So please go through all the NCERT lines of the ecosystem chapter. Let us continue with the next chapter, biodiversity and its conservation. Let us now discuss the next part, the last chapter of our the zoology part, which is biodiversity and conservation. Now what is biodiversity? Or let us take what is diversity. So variety of organisms or group of organisms, different types of organisms living at one particular place is called as diversity. Now generally a small introduction is being given here. Now how to conserve this diversity, how to maintain these species without getting extinct. Now if an alien from a distant galaxy visits our planet, the first thing that would amaze and baffle him would probably be enormous diversity that it would encounter, because so many different types of species are present in this world. Okay, even for humans, like we are also astonished. Even we see so many different types of organisms, but still we are confused with many organisms. We see new organisms always. Okay, then here you have to remember 2000 species of ants, 3 lakh species of beetles, 28,000 species of fishes, and nearly 20,000 species of orchids. In this particular chapter, there are so many numericals which you have to remember, and there is no change in that. You have to follow according to your NCERT. Whatever NCERT says, you have to follow according to this particular chapter. All these numericals you have to remember carefully. Okay. So 2 lakh species of ants, 3 lakh species of beetles, 28,000 species of fishes, and 20,000 species of orchids. Okay. Then ecologists and evolutionary biologists have been trying to understand the significance of such diversity by asking different types of questions. So what are the different types of questions here? Why are there so many species? Because there is an interdependence of different types of species. Species try to evolve. Did such great diversity exist throughout their history? No. How did diversification come about? Because of evolution, survival of the fittest. And how and why this diversity important to the biosphere to produce more and more number of species and for the sustenance of this world? Then would it function any differently if the diversity was much less? Yes, obviously if the diversity decreases, the sustainability of the ecosystems also decreases. How do you humans get benefited from the diversity? We get so many products from this animals. We have so many users of the plants and animals which are existing in this nature. Now, biodiversity, what is meant by biodiversity? So, biosphere, in our biosphere, immense diversity or nothing but heterogeneity exists not only at species level, but at all levels of biological organization, ranging from macromolecules to biomes. So, cells, we have different types of cells. Macromolecules, we have different types of macromolecules. Cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, organisms, populations, communities, ecosystems, landscapes, biomes, we have so many different types. So, diversity exists at all the levels of the biological organization. Okay. The sociobiologist Edward Wilson, he popularized the term biodiversity. Sociobiologist Edward Wilson popularized the term biodiversity. In this biodiversity, we are going to see three different types of diversities. The first one is genetic diversity, or the diversity at the species level. A single species might show high diversity at the genetic level over its distributional range. For example, the Rauwolfia vomitoria, which is growing in the Himalayan regions, will differ in terms of potency and concentration of the chemical reserpine, because the Rauwolfia will produce different species of Rauwolfia will produce different types of reserpines, different types of chemicals. The potency, the concentration and the potency of the chemical, the amount of the chemical that they produce keeps on changing by different types of species. Similarly, India has more than 50,000 genetically different strains of rice, very important, as well as 1,000 varieties of mangoes, 1,000 different genetical strains of mangoes, difference at the genetic level. Now, species diversity at a species level, for example, Western Ghats have greater amphibian diversity, species diversity than Eastern Ghats. Western Ghats have greater amphibian species diversity when compared with the Eastern Ghats. So, this is an example for species diversity. Ecological diversity between two different ecosystems. At ecosystem level, India, for instance, with its deserts, rainforests, mangroves, coral reefs, wetlands, estuaries and alpine meadows, is more diversified than a Scandinavian country or a European country like Norway, because Norway does not have this much diversity as the India has. Okay, this is about the three different types of diversities. Then, so for this diversity to be formed, it has taken millions of years. So it is our responsibility to protect this particular diversity. So here we are discussing about biodiversity and its conservation. Okay. Now, this is about some numericals. How many species are there on the earth and how many are present in the India? According to IUCN, that is International Union of Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources 2004, the total number of plant and animal species is slightly more than 1.5 million. 1.5 million. Estimates, they differ. This is just an estimate and there are some other estimates which also differ. For many taxonomic groups, species inventories is more complete in temperate regions than in tropical countries, because in temperate regions, the number of species are less when compared with the tropical countries. So, if number of species are less, identifying the species and discovering the new species is easier when compared with the tropical regions. So, that is why species inventories is more complete in temperate regions rather than the tropical regions. Now, then, considering that overwhelmingly a large proportion of species is waiting to be discovered in tropics, because tropics have huge diversity, so it takes time for this species to be, new species to be discovered in the tropics. Okay. Then this biologist will make a statistical comparison of temperate tropical species richness of an exhaustively studied group of insects and extrapolate this ratio to other groups of animals and plants to come up with a gross estimate of the total number of species in the earth, because if the new species has been discovered, they will compare this new species with the total number of insects which have been present here and then extrapolate these number of species of insects to the different species present in this temperate and tropical regions. Okay. The extreme estimates gives 20 to 50 million, extreme estimates, the estimates of different scientists, but Robert May's estimates global species diversity is about 7 million. So many numerical values which you have to remember here. So IUCN 1.5 million, extreme estimates 20 to 50 millions, and Robert May's estimates 7 millions. Now, here we have some different pie diagrams. Now, here if you look at this, out of all the species which have been discovered, more than 70% of the species recorded are animals, while plants including algae, fungi, bryophytes, gymnosperms and angiosperms not more than 22%. Even in the animals, out of 70% of the animals, again 70% of the animals are insects. It is for every 10 animals, 7 are insects. Number of fungi species is in the world is more than the combined total of the species of fishes, amphibians, reptiles and mammals. Very important. Number of fungi is more than fishes, amphibians, reptiles and mammals. Now, this is indicated in this pie diagram. Now, this is an invertebrate diagram saying insects will occupy the largest proportion. Next is occupied by other animal groups. Next is occupied by molluscans. Next is occupied by crustaceans. Here if you talk about fishes will occupy the first position. Birds will occupy the second position, reptiles will occupy the third position, amphibians will occupy the fourth position, mammals will occupy the fifth position in the vertebrates. Whereas if we go with the plants, angiosperms will occupy the first position, fungi will occupy the second position, then algae will occupy the third position, mosses fourth position, ferns and lilies fifth position, then lichens will occupy the sixth position. Like this, we have the different types of organisms which are present here in these plants. So, this is how you can tell the biodiversity of different types of organisms, either it may be an invertebrates or the vertebrates and the number of plants. Okay. But in these estimates, we are not placing the prokaryotes, because prokaryotes, we accept biochemical or molecular criteria for delineating species of this group, then their diversity alone might write into millions, because prokaryotes keep on dividing. When we count, even before we count, they keep on dividing and their diversity increases rapidly, and then a lot of mutations takes place in the prokaryotes. So, new species are continuously formed. So, we cannot estimate the total number of prokaryotes here. So, these estimates whatever we are talking, we are not including prokaryotes. We are only including the eukaryotes here. Now, this is very important paragraph with lot of numericals. India has 2.4% of the world's land area, but the diversity is the impressively 8.1%. Very less 2.5% of the land area, but diversity is very huge in India, which is around 8.1%. This is the reason India is placed in 12 mega diversity countries in the world. We have 12 mega diversity countries, out of which India is one of the 12 mega diversity countries because of its low area but huge diversity. Okay. Nearly 45,000 species of plants and twice as many of animals have been recorded from India. 45,000 plants, twice as many number of animals. If you accept, still there are many species to be discovered. If you accept May's global estimates, 22% of the species are recorded so far in India. Now, out of these, still there are 1,000 plants, 1 lakh plant species to be discovered and 3 lakh animal species to be discovered in the India. But these organisms, these plants and animals to be discovered, we need lot of manpower, we need lot of taxonomists. But before we discover these species, the nature's biological library is burning before we catalog, before we identify them, before we place them in a list. The nature's biological library is burning because we need lot of manpower, and before we discover, there are so many species, thousands of species which are becoming extinct. So that's why we say the nature's biological library is burning before we catalog all these species. Now, patterns of biodiversity. So, depending upon the latitudinal gradients, how the organisms are being located or how the organisms are being distributed in our world. Latitudinal gradients. Diversity of plants and animals is not uniform throughout the world. Not uniform throughout the world. It depends upon different environmental and climatic conditions. For many group of animals or plants, there are interesting patterns in diversity, mainly latitudinal gradient. And see this point carefully. In general, species diversity decreases as we move away from the equators towards the poles. From the equator, when we are going towards the poles, the temperature gradually decreases. When temperature decreases, species diversity also decreases. Availability of oxygen also decreases, species diversity decreases. Okay. With very few exceptions, tropics with latitudinal range 23.5 degrees north to 23.5 degrees south harbor more species when compared with the temperates. Tropics will have more species, temperates will have less number of species. Now let us see that. Colombia, which is located near the equator, which is a tropical region, have 1400 species of birds, not other species, birds. Whereas New York, 41 degrees north, has 105 species, and Greenland at 71 degrees north has 56 species. So gradually, when it is coming towards the poles, so 1400, 105, 56, it is keeping on decreasing. Whereas India, which majority of its land in the tropical regions, we have 1200 species of the birds. So Colombia 1400, New York 105, Greenland 56, India 1200 birds. And a tropical forest called Ecuador has 10 times as many number of vascular plants when compared with the temperate forest like Midwest of USA. The Midwest of USA is a temperate region. Ecuador is a tropical region. Ecuador will have 10 times more number of vascular plants when compared with the Midwest of USA, because Midwest of USA is a temperate region. Now, when it comes to Amazon rainforest, where are they located? South America, very, very important. South American area, Amazon rainforest has greater biodiversity on the earth, greatest biodiversity on the earth. How? There are 40,000 species of plants in Amazon, 40,000, 3,000 species of fishes in Amazon, 1,300 species of birds in Amazon, 427 mammals are present, 427 amphibians are present, 378 reptiles are present, and more than 1,25,000 invertebrates are present in the Amazon rainforest. 40,000 species of plants, 3,000 species of fishes, 1,300 species of birds, 427 amphibians, 427 mammals, 378 reptiles, 1,25,000 invertebrates are present in the Amazon rainforest, and very interestingly, more than 2 million insect species are waiting to be discovered. 2 million insect species are waiting to be discovered in the Amazon rainforest. So why the tropics will have more biodiversity, greater biodiversity? There are three main reasons. Because tropics will have more, tropics are not seasonally, they have less fluctuations of the seasons, less seasonal variations. So always mostly the common constant season has been maintained there. Tropics will have no occasional disturbances, natural disasters, occasional disturbances will be very less, as well as tropics will have more solar energy, which contributes for more productivity. This is which contribute indirectly to greater diversity. So this is about the tropics, why tropics have more diversity than the temperates. Now, the next is species area relationships. This is given by the Alexander von Humboldt when he is wandering in the South American jungles. Right, this Alexander von Humboldt has given the species area relationship. He observed that within a region, a species richness increases with increase in explored area, but only up to a limit. As the explored area increases, species richness also increases, but this is only up to a certain limit. Now, for a wide variety of taxa like plants, angiosperms, birds and bats, when you plot a graph, it is the species richness to the area, it gives a rectangular hyperbola. Now, if you just take it in a logarithmic scale, it gives a straight line. This rectangular hyperbola is represented by the equation s is equal to Ca to the power of z, whereas the straight line is represented by the equation log s is equal to log c plus z log a. You have to remember the formula. Now what is S here? S is nothing but species richness, A is nothing but area, Z is the slope of the line, the regression coefficient depending upon the factors which are available there, C is nothing but the y intercept. Now this Z value ranges from one level to other level. The Z value is of 0.1 to 0.2 regardless of the taxonomic group. Regardless of the taxonomic group or the region, the Z value ranges from 0.1 to 0.2. The Z value for entire continent ranges from 0.6 to 1.2. Z value for entire continent ranges from 0.6 to 1.2. Z value for tropical forest, the frugivorous birds and mammals in the tropical forest, it ranges from 1.15. Now, what does steeper slopes mean in this content? If the slope is steeper towards the upward direction, it means that the species richness is very, very high. The slope is steeper towards the downward direction, it means that the species richness gradually decreases. Okay, that's about the species area relationship. Now, what is the importance of species diversity to an ecosystem? Now, because species diversity, this is very important statement here. For many decades, ecologists believe that communities with more species generally tend to be more stable than those with less species. If the ecosystem has more species, it is said to be more stable. If the ecosystem has less species, it is said to be less stable. So, stable community, what is a stable community? It should not show too much variation in productivity from year to year. Productivity should be constant. It must be resistant or resilient to occasional disturbances, though natural disturbances should not occur here. Then it must be resistant to invasions by alien species. If the alien species come, even the ecosystem should be stable. Then we call it as a stable community. Now, in the stable community, the David Tillman, on his long-term ecosystem experiments, outdoor plot experiments, he have done some experiments and he found that the plots with more species showed less year-to-year variation with the total biomass. If the species are more, variation was less in the biomass. And he also showed that increased diversity contributed to higher productivity. If the diversity increases, productivity also gradually increases. Okay, that's about the David Tillman's outdoor plots experiment. But if at all, if you lose some of the species in the ecosystem, then if there is any damage to the ecosystem, obviously yes. But if the species is very important to that ecosystem, then that will be true. If not, that cannot be possible. So there is a question here. What happened, would Western Ghats ecosystems be less functional if one of the three species, tree frog species is lost? Nothing. How is the quality of life affected? Instead 20,000 we have 50,000, 15,000 species. It depends. It depends upon the species which are depending on the ants. For that, there are some questions here. There is an explanation called Rivet-Popper hypothesis, which is given by Stanford ecologist Paul Ehrlich. Rivet-Popper hypothesis, he says that he compares the ecosystem with an aeroplane. He compares an ecosystem with the aeroplane. Now what is this? So this is aeroplane, it's an ecosystem, and there are some shades which are present here, the shades which are present in the aeroplane. And all these shades are made up of screw. These screws are nothing but rivets. He compares these rivets with the species. Rivets are compared with the species, and this aeroplane is compared with an ecosystem. Aeroplane is compared with an ecosystem. Now, if the passengers who are traveling in the ecosystem, if they remove some of the rivets from the shades, then okay, no problem, because the rivets of the shades will not damage the flight ecosystem safety. But if the passengers if they are continuously taking all the rivets from the shades, then they may damage the ecosystem. But if some passenger removes a rivet from the propeller, this is a key species. What is meant by key species? Propeller or wing. Now, the very important species which is present in the ecosystem, key species, because keystone species will maintain the species diversity. So if that is being removed, then the other species also will become extinct because of interspecific competition. So key species is very, very important in every ecosystem. So this is how the ecosystem's diversity has to be maintained, which was explained by taking an aeroplane by the Paul Ehrlich's rivet-popper hypothesis. Okay, if the key species is lost, ecosystem is immediately affected. But if the other species are lost, it may not be affected individually, but it takes a lot of time for the ecosystem to be affected. Okay. Now, loss of biodiversity. Loss of how the biodiversity has been lost here. Now, the biological wealth of our planet has been declining rapidly, and the accusing finger is clearly pointing to human activities. We are responsible for the decrease of biodiversity. Colonization of tropical Pacific islands by humans led to the elimination of 2,000 species of native birds. Because of humans in the Pacific islands, 2,000 native birds became extinct. According to IUCN Red List, what is Red List? The Red List consists of the number of species which are already extinct, number of species which are going to become extinct, endangered species, number of species which are going to extinct in near future, vulnerable species, number of species which are very rare in our ecosystem. Like this, we are going to discuss about the different types of species in the Red List. In this IUCN Red List, according to 2024, 784 species including 338 vertebrates, 359 invertebrates and 87 plants became extinct in last 500 years. Very important, all the numericals. The recent extinctions, if we discuss, dodo is a bird which is extincted from Mauritius, quagga is from Africa, thylacine is from Australia, stellar sea cow is from Russia. This is very important, the previous NEET question. Dodo is from Mauritius, quagga is from Africa, thylacine is from Australia, stellar sea cow is from Russia, and as well as 3 subspecies of tiger, Bali, Javan and the Caspian. In last 20 years, 27 species became extinct, disappearance. Okay, now, and these extinctions are not random across the taxa. They are different. For different taxa, different extinctions are being possible. Some groups like amphibians are more vulnerable to extinction, more vulnerable. Amphibians because they need water for their survival, for their reproduction. Cutaneous respiration occurs here. So mostly amphibians are more vulnerable to extinction. Adding to the present scenario or the grim scenario, more than 15,500 species in the world wide are facing the threat of extinction. Presently, 12% of the bird species, 23% of the mammal species, 32% of the amphibian species, 31% of the gymnosperms are going to become extinct or facing the threat of extinction. These are called as endangered species. Now, if you go with before greater than 3 billion years, almost there were 5 episodes of the mass extinction. 5 times the mass extinctions, many number of organisms has been extinct. Now, the present extinction is 6th extinction, which is 100 to 1000 times faster because humans are responsible for the 6th extinction. And if this continues within next 100 years, nearly half of the species is going to become extinct. What happens if biodiversity is lost? Decline in plant productivity. Plant productivity gradually decreases. Lower resistance to environmental perturbations. If you have any environmental disasters or environmental like earthquakes, tsunamis and all, the resistance gradually decreases, such as drought. Increased variability in certain ecosystem processes like productivity, water use, pest and disease cycles. Productivity, variation, not increased plant productivity, increased variation in the plant productivity, water usages, pest cycles and disease cycles. There is a lot of variation because of loss of biodiversity. Okay. Now, what are biodiversity losses? What are the causes for the biodiversity losses? Here we are going to discuss 4 major causes, which is called as evil quartet. Evil is nothing which is something dangerous. Quartet is 4 reasons which cause the loss of biodiversity. The first is habitat loss and fragmentation, which is the most important cause for the loss of biodiversity. This is making the plants and animals to become extinct. Once upon a time, there was a 14% of the forest cover, but right now the forest cover is not more than 6%. And by the time you see this, many hectares of forest are being lost. Amazon rainforest, which is called lungs of the planet, which has been cut for soybean cultivation and also for developing beef cattle. So like this, many habitats are being degraded. So if the habitats are being cut, even the number of species also will be degraded, right? So when large habitats are broken into small fragments, there are some organisms like mammals and birds which require large territories, migratory birds, all these are mostly affected and their population gradually declines, okay. Now, the second thing is over exploitation, excess usage. Humans, because of their excess usage, humans because of greed, and need turns to greed, some of the organisms became extinct. Mainly 500 years before, last 500 years, Stella's sea cow for meat and passenger pigeon for the transport of the information both became extinct, right. Then because of over harvesting, the marine fishes are going to become extinct. Now they are at endangered state, but they are going to become extinct. Alien species invasions, aliens are nothing but the foreign species. If they enter into our the particular area, then they may also make the other species to get eliminated. For example, in Nile perch, in Lake Victoria, the Nile perch, the large fish is introduced, which led to the elimination of 200 species of small, colorful, cichlid fishes. You must be familiar with the Parthenium, the carrot grass, which is the most problematic weed, lantana and water hyacinth, Ecornia, terror of Bengal. These are the most problematic weeds, alien species which are led to the extinction of many other species in our areas. In recent times, African catfish Clarius garipinus, as it is introduced into our aquaculture, the native indigenous catfishes became extinct in our rivers because these does not allow the native catfishes to survive. Okay. Then finally, co-extinction. Co-extinction is if one organism becomes extinct, the organism which is dependent on that particular organism, mainly we have seen in the mutualistic associations. For example, if fig extincts, wasp extincts. If wasp extincts, fig extincts because they are both are interdependent on each other, which is called co-extinction. Plant pollinator mutualism comes under coexistence, plant pollinator mutualism, and as well as some host fish species which become extinct. So this is how you can see the co-extinction. These are the 4 reasons where the loss of biodiversity takes place. Now, how should we conserve? Why should we conserve biodiversity? Why? Why should we conserve biodiversity? Because from the biodiversity, we have 3 major uses: narrowly utilitarian, broadly utilitarian and ethical argument. What is narrowly utilitarian? We have some little usages from the biodiversity which we don't depend much, but we are dependent on that for a little thing which is nothing but the narrow. What are those? Humans derive benefits from forests in the form of food, firewood, fiber, construction material, industrial products and products of medicinal importance. More than 25% of the drugs are made up of the plants and 25,000 plants are involved in preparing medicines, right? And nobody knows, like there are still so many medicinal plants and useful plants which are useful for us, and we have to conserve those plants for the further usage in the tropical regions. And bioprospecting, what is meant by bioprospecting? We should save the molecular, genetic and species level diversity for identifying, for extracting the products for the economic importance, and this is called as bioprospectus. Now, similarly, broadly utilitarian. What is broadly utilitarian? Major usage where if the Amazon rainforests are being degraded, 20% of the world's oxygen is being, because Amazon world provides 20% of the world's oxygen to the atmosphere. So Amazon rainforests are contributing for major oxygen. So they are also called lungs of the planet. This is a major usage. Similarly, pollinators. Pollinators like bees, bumblebees, birds and bats. These are very important for helping in pollination for the seeds and fruits to be produced. And the aesthetic pleasure, the pleasure which we get from the nature, the walking through thick woods, watching spring flowers in full bloom or waking up to bulbul song. This is a aesthetic pleasure. All these comes under broadly utilitarian. And finally, ethical argument. What is ethical argument? Every organism has an equal right to survive. Philosophically or spiritually, we need to realize that every organism, every species has an intrinsic value, and it is our responsibility to pass our biological legacy in a good order to the next future generations. So this is how we have to conserve, this is why we have to conserve biodiversity. Now let us see how to conserve biodiversity. For conservation of biodiversity, we have two methods, which is called ex situ conservation or off-site conservation, and in situ conservation, or it is also called on-site conservation. If we conserve the plants and animals in their own natural habitats, that is called ex situ conservation. If we conserve the plants and animals, taking away from their natural habitats, keeping them in artificial habitats and protecting them, this is called as ex situ conservation or off-site conservation. When it comes to in situ conservation, in the in situ conservation, first we are discussing about the biodiversity hotspots. What are biodiversity hotspots? Biodiversity hotspots are the regions where you can see the species richness, very high levels of species richness and very high degree of endemism. What is endemism? Species confined to that particular area is called as endemism. Now, initially there are 25 biodiversity hotspots, but 9 newly were been added, now totally accounting for 34 biodiversity hotspots all around the world. And these hotspots are also areas of accelerated habitat loss, because good diversity has been found here, so humans definitely obviously will go and destroy it. Okay. Then 3 of these hotspots are around India, Western Ghats and Sri Lanka, Indo-Burma and Himalaya cover our country's biodiversity. Now all these biodiversity hotspots put together cover less than 2% of the Earth's land area. Now if these are maintained, almost we can save the 30% of the extinctions by maintaining this biodiversity hotspots. Okay. Then now when it comes to the biosphere reserves, there are 14 biosphere reserves, which is an in situ conservation. 90 national parks where animals are conserved in the national parks, it also comes under in situ conservation. Biosphere reserves, there are the core areas and the buffer areas where the areas where the people can survive, core areas where the people are not allowed. National parks, the people are not allowed, only for some particular regions the people will be allowed. 448 wildlife sanctuaries which are present in our India. Then India has history of cultural traditions, mainly sacred groves. What are meant by sacred groves? Sacred is nothing but something holy. Grove is group of trees. Some tribal people protect some group of trees which are called as sacred groves. We see different types of sacred groves like Kashi and Jaintia hills in Meghalaya, very important. Aravali hills of Rajasthan, Western Ghats of Karnataka and Maharashtra, Sarguja, Chanda, Bastar of Madhya Pradesh, and now the only refuge, only last hope of sacred groves present in our India are Meghalaya, the last hope of sacred groves. Now, so all this comes under the in situ conservation. Now let us see about the ex situ conservation. Organisms taken out of their natural habitats, protected out of their natural habitats is called ex situ conservation. In this we will go with zoological parks where we artificially provide food and space and shelter and protection to the organisms, botanical gardens to the plants, zoological parks for the animals, wildlife safari parks also for the animals. Then ex situ conservation, the conservation outside also involves the keeping threatened species in the enclosures. For example, cryopreservation techniques where the eggs or sperms or cells of the organisms are being stored in laboratories at liquid nitrogen at minus 196 degrees centigrade, which is called as cryopreservation. And these eggs can be fertilized in vitro outside in the laboratory. These eggs can be fertilized. This is coming under the in vitro fertilization. Seed banks can be seen, seed vaults can be seen, gene banks can be seen. So seed banks, seeds are protected in the seed banks, genes are protected in the gene banks. All these comes under ex situ conservation. So zoological parks, botanical gardens, wildlife safari parks, ex situ conservation, cryopreservation techniques at liquid nitrogen at minus 196 degrees centigrade, then seed banks, in vitro fertilization, all these comes under ex situ conservations. Right. Now, biodiversity knows no political boundaries. There is no political boundaries. It's a collective responsibility of everyone. The historic convention of biological diversity, Earth Summit, was held in, summit is a meeting, Rio de Janeiro in 1992. They called upon all the nations to take appropriate measures for the conservation of biodiversity. As well as World Summit is held in 2002 in Johannesburg, South Africa, where 190 countries pledged their commitment to achieve by 2010 a significant reduction in the current rate of biodiversity. So, Earth Summit 1992 in Rio de Janeiro and World Summit 2002 in Johannesburg, South Africa, in which 190 countries have been participated. So, this is about the biodiversity, which is the different numericals which are seen in the biodiversity. And please remember, 1.5 million species have been recorded. We have already seen that. And then 6 million species on earth waiting to be discovered and named. This is not given in the initial textbook, but it is given in the summary. Please remember that. As well as here, there are small changes which are given about the national parks and wildlife sanctuaries. Better follow the national parks and wildlife sanctuaries in the initial textbook, where we have around 14 biosphere reserves, 90 national parks and 448 wildlife sanctuaries. So, please follow this particular thing rather than the summary part. So, this is about biodiversity. So, with this, all the topics in the zoology has been completed in this Sankalp program. I hope in the RE-NEET, the people who are writing the RE-NEET are well equipped and well versed with all the topics which we have discussed, and in future, within few days, the examination is going to be conducted, the RE-NEET examination. Hope you do your best in the RE-NEET examination. Everything, be positive, stay confident, believe in yourself, and write your exam with lots of confidence. You can definitely achieve great success. All the Sri Chaitanya students, definitely, because you have learned enormous hard work, extremely good hard work. So, you are going to get the best results in the RE-NEET examination. No need to worry about anything. Be positive, stay confident, believe in yourself. All the best to everyone for the NEET examinations. Thank you so much. God bless you all.